He was just a poor single dad trying to blend into a world that wasn't built for men like him. She was the bride everyone expected to have it all, but on the day that was supposed to be picture perfect, something happened, something no one saw coming. This is a story about dignity and silence, the kind of kindness that leaves echoes in a love that grew not from grand gestures, but from the smallest, truest things. If you've ever wondered what happens when two people from different worlds cross paths at exactly the wrong or maybe the right moment, stay with us before we begin. If you believe in stories that warm the heart and celebrate quiet strength, consider subscribing to the channel. We'd love to have you with us for every chapter. A poor single dad was laughed at a wedding until the bride took off her heels and chose him. The scent of sawdust oil and autumn air hung thick in the workshop, comforting, familiar, and almost sacred. Lucas Heron stood hunched over a hand-sanded cabinet frame, steady as ever. Each movement was practiced over and deliberate. He didn't just build furniture, he mended things quietly without fanfare. Outside, golden light streamed through the window panes, filtered by the dust that always lingered mid-air like old memories. In the corner of the shop, his 6-year-old daughter Ellie sat cross-legged on a paint-stained blanket, threading plastic beads into a clumsy bracelet. She hummed an off-key tune only a child could invent, completely unaware of the weight sitting on her father's chest. Lucas glanced toward her, the corner of his lips twitching in a smile. Ellie was the only reason the air still felt breathable some days. He checked the calendar, pinned to the wall, 2 red circles, one for the overdue mortgage notice, the other marking the upcoming town fair, which Ellie had been begging to attend. He'd already sold an old set of tools just to keep the lights on another week, and yet he wasn't bitter. Not anymore. There had been a time when the silence after his wife's passing had nearly broken him, a time when grief threatened to rot the walls from the inside out. But Ellie's small hand in his, her bright voice calling Daddy, had pulled him back every single time. She was all he had, all he needed. The clang of the front bell snapped him from his thoughts. "Package for you, Lucas." Marianne called out, stepping into the shop with her usual mix of curiosity and small-town nosiness. She held up a thick, cream-colored envelope with gold embossing. Lucas wiped his hands on a rag and took it with confusion. No return address, no postage. He opened it carefully using the edge of his chisel. Inside was a wedding invitation. Miss Sadie Monroe and Mr. Chadwick Callister request the honor of your presence. Lucas froze. The name hit him like a name in a forgotten dream. Sadie Monroe. He hadn't heard that name since high school. "Who's that from?" Ellie asked, bounding over. "A girl I used to know," Lucas said, handing her the invitation. "Is she nice?" "She was kind, quiet, brilliant." He paused, fingers brushing the edge of the paper, and a little sad. Back in school, Sadie had been the loner, not in a tragic or dramatic way, just invisible in the way that mattered. She always had a notebook in hand, sometimes poetry, sometimes sketches. She kept to herself, the kind of girl you didn't notice until she wasn't there. He remembered one day in particular, a cold November rain. Everyone ran inside from the parking lot, but Sadie had been left behind. Standing soaked in the schoolyard, clutching a book to her chest, he had pulled off his jacket and placed it on her shoulders without saying a word. She had looked up, startled. "You'll get cold," she whispered. "I'd rather be cold than let someone else freeze." He replied. It wasn't a grand gesture. Not really, but something about that moment lingered over the years. And now here she was, marrying Chad Callister, a name Lucas knew well. The Callisters were practically royalty in Oregon, with money old enough to have its own zip code. Lucas had built a deck for one of their vacation homes. Once he remembered being handed his check like a handout. Why would someone like Sadie invite him? Maybe it was a mistake, a generic list sent to everyone from school. He hadn't even spoken to her in over 15 years. But that night, as he tucked Ellie into bed, she clutched the envelope to her chest and whispered, "Maybe she remembers you. Daddy, people remember when you're kind." Lucas didn't sleep much that night. He sat at the kitchen table staring at the invitation beside his unpaid utility bill. His calloused fingers traced the print over and over, as if trying to find the real meaning beneath the script. Could it be that she remembered? Could it be that she wanted him there? Or maybe the invitation was a mirror held up to remind him that no act of kindness is ever truly forgotten. In the morning, Lucas walked into Ellie's room, where she was already wide awake, her sunflower yellow dress draped on the bed. "Can we go?" she asked with a grin that showed every gap in her baby teeth. Lucas looked at her, then at the invitation again. "Yeah," he said softly. "We'll go." He packed the dress, ironed his least wrinkled shirt, and scrubbed the truck until it didn't look like it had been through 2 winters and a divorce. The engine sputtered to life, coughing in protest, but Lucas felt something stir as they pulled onto the highway. Not nostalgia, not regret, something gentler, like forgiveness. Maybe not from Sadie, maybe not even from himself, but from the life he'd been trying to piece back together all these years. And somewhere on the other end of that wedding aisle, he had a feeling something or someone was waiting. The highway stretched long and open, lined with golden fields and broken fences. Lucas hadn't driven this far out in years, maybe not since before Ellie was born. The old truck groaned with every mile, but it held together much like him. Worn at the edges, tough in the joints, but still moving forward, Ellie, seated beside him, kicked her little legs as they passed farms, gas stations, and the occasional rusted-out barn. She wore her sunflower yellow dress and a cardigan with mismatched buttons, one of which she had sewn herself. Her braid was uneven, but Lucas thought it was perfect. "Do you think she'll remember you?" Ellie asked, looking at the invitation for the 100th time. Lucas kept his eyes on the road. "I doubt it." "She should," Ellie said brightly. "You're hard to forget." He smiled but didn't reply. Truth was, he wasn't even sure what he was doing. The idea of Sadie Monroe, once the quiet girl who scribbled poetry in her notebooks, now becoming Mrs. Callister, marrying into a family that practically owned half the state, felt surreal. He didn't belong in her world, he never had. But still, he came. By mid-afternoon. They reached the Callister estate, nestled beyond wrought iron gates in a winding tree-lined drive. The house, if it could still be called that, was a mansion, all white columns and endless windows, too perfect for anyone to actually live in. As Lucas pulled up, a valet blinked at the sight of the truck. Its fender was held on by hope and duct tape. "Sir," the young man said hesitantly, "do you need assistance?" Lucas smiled dryly. "Just don't scratch her." The valet gave a forced laugh, unsure if it was a joke. Lucas helped Ellie down and took her hand. She looked up at the towering house and whispered, "It's like a castle." "Let's try not to knock over any suits of armor," Lucas murmured. They followed the crowd up the stone steps, surrounded by crisp tuxedos and glittering dresses. Everything shimmered. People light champagne. Lucas felt like a smudge on a polished mirror. He was very aware of his thrift store shirt, Ellie's handmade cardigan, and the calluses on his hands. A woman with a headset stopped them at the door, clipboard in hand. Name Lucas Heron. She blinked and scanned the list, then looked back at him with mild surprise. "You're on the bride's personal guest list. She left specific instructions to seat you near the terrace." With the child, Lucas furrowed his brow. "She remembered me." The woman gave a small, polite nod. Apparently, inside the house opened up like a dream, chandeliers, larger than his living room. Marble floors that echoed even Ellie's tiny steps. They were led through to a sprawling garden lit by hundreds of fairy lights. A string quartet played something elegant and slow. Their table was tucked under a blooming magnolia tree. A little removed from the center, Lucas was grateful for the distance. Ellie leaned close. "Everyone's so shiny," he chuckled. "Stick close to me. I'm the dullest thing here." But not everyone found them amusing. A woman at a nearby table looked them over with a tight smile and leaned to her friend. "Guests of the staff," maybe, she whispered, not quietly enough. Lucas stiffened. He reached for Ellie's hand, trying not to let the comment linger. Then, like a breeze cutting through summer heat, a soft voice said his name, Lucas. He turned and froze. Sadie Monroe stood just a few feet away, framed by the golden light of late afternoon. Her dress was a soft lilac, simple, elegant, and free of the excess that defined the event around them. Her hair was swept back, her makeup minimal. She looked real. "Sadie," he said, stunned. "I hoped you'd come," she said, offering a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "You look well." "You mean rich," she teased. "No, I mean..." Peaceful. That made her laugh, but it sounded hollow. Looks deceive. She looked down at Ellie. And you must be Ellie. I love your dress. Ellie grinned. Daddy fixed the buttons. Sadie's gaze softened. Of course he did. Lucas rubbed the back of his neck. I don't want to overstep. I wasn't sure if the invitation was a mistake. Sadie's smile turned quiet. It wasn't. I sent it myself. Why, her expression grew distant, pained. Because sometimes someone does a kindness so small they forget it. But the person on the receiving end remembers it forever. Lucas didn't know what to say, so he didn't. Sadie continued. You were the only one who ever looked me in the eye when I felt invisible. You didn't save me or fix me, but you saw me. That matters. Before Lucas could respond, a man in a tailored suit called out from the crowd. Sadie photos. Now she flinched, just slightly, then looked back at Lucas. Will you stay? She asked. Just stay. Lucas met her eyes. We'll be here. She gave Ellie one last smile, then disappeared into the crowd. Lucas sat down, heart full and mind racing. He had come expecting nothing, only to discover that sometimes the smallest gesture could echo through years like a song that never ended. And perhaps that echo had just begun to sing back. The sun dipped lower over the Callister estate, casting warm amber over the white linen tables and manicured hedges. The scent of gardenias mingled with champagne and high-end cologne. To most guests, it was the perfect evening, tailored, orchestrated, sterile in its perfection. To Lucas, it felt like walking through a museum he wasn't allowed to touch. He sat at the corner table with Ellie on his lap, quietly chewing a chocolate-covered strawberry she'd snuck from the dessert tray. Her wide eyes darted from one extravagant detail to the next, the string quartet tuning up under the gazebo, the champagne tower, the perfectly symmetrical floral arrangements, Daddy. She whispered, as if trying not to disturb the air. Do you think this is what heaven looks like? Lucas looked around. If it is, I'm probably underdressed. Ellie giggled and nuzzled into his shoulder. He held her close, grateful for the little warmth anchoring him. All around, conversations hummed like well-oiled engines. There were greetings full of feigned excitement, laughter with too much sharpness, and handshakes that meant everything and nothing. Lucas felt like a wrench in a room full of diamonds. He had tried, really. He'd ironed his shirt, polished his boots, even shaved that morning. But here, surrounded by tailored suits and pedigreed smiles, he was still the man with a toolbox in his truck and a mortgage payment overdue. I think I just saw a movie star, Ellie said with a gasp. Lucas followed her gaze to a couple posing for photos. He didn't recognize them, but the cameras loved them. Maybe, he murmured, don't stare though. Why not? Because that's what makes you different, he said gently. You don't need to look up to people to know they're not better than you. Ellie nodded as if she understood, though Lucas wasn't sure he fully did. He just knew the air here felt heavy in ways that had nothing to do with gravity. Then came the laughter. It started at a nearby table, sharp, unmistakably pointed. Lucas turned his head just in time to catch the tail end of a snide remark. Did you see that guy with the flannel? What's next? Overalls at the reception? Another voice mocking. Maybe he's the entertainment, a real-life working-class exhibit. Lucas's face flushed. His first instinct was to rise, to get Ellie and leave before her innocence caught the stain of it. But then Ellie, oblivious, reached for another strawberry and looked up at him. Are we having fun yet? And somehow her words grounded him. He stayed seated, though every nerve in his body itched to walk away. Then someone unexpected approached. Excuse me, a woman in a deep green satin dress said, clutching a crystal flute of champagne. She was around Lucas's age, her expression caught between curiosity and discomfort. You're Lucas, right? Sadie's friend Lucas rose slightly, nodding. I suppose so. I'm Kara, maid of honor. She gestured toward the main garden. Sadie mentioned you might prefer someplace quieter. Would you like to walk around? Lucas hesitated, then looked at Ellie. Want to go for a walk, bug? She nodded eagerly, her sunflower dress fluttering as she hopped down from the chair. They followed Kara past the central tables and down a path lined with lavender and boxwood. It led to a quieter grove, a little away from the glamour. The music was softer here, and the voices fainter. She's different tonight, Kara said suddenly. Sadie, Lucas asked, Yes, not nervous, not excited. Just elsewhere. Lucas didn't reply. He didn't know what Sadie was supposed to feel, what anyone would feel, standing at the edge of a life chosen more for appearance than affection. She's always been a little different, he said at last. Even back then, Kara glanced sideways. She told me about you. Lucas looked surprised. She did. She said you once gave her your coat in the rain and didn't ask for it back, that it was the first time in her life someone was kind to her without expecting something. Lucas shifted awkwardly. It wasn't much, Kara smiled, sad and knowing. Maybe not to you. They reached a small bench beneath a weeping willow. Ellie darted ahead, chasing a butterfly. Lucas watched her heart swelling. She's lovely, Kara said. How old? 6, and my whole world. Kara nodded. You're a good father. That's clear. Lucas didn't respond. Praise made him uncomfortable. He just did what needed to be done. After a while, Kara excused herself, leaving them alone. Lucas sat on the bench, elbows on his knees. Ellie plopped beside him, breathless. Daddy, she said, can we stay longer? I want to see the bride. Lucas hesitated. If she wants us here, we'll stay. I think she does, Ellie said seriously, then leaned her head against his arm. Lucas stared out at the twinkling lights, the growing shadows. For the first time since arriving, he didn't feel quite so out of place. Not because the people had changed, but because he had stopped letting their opinions define his worth. He was a man with dirt under his nails and love in his chest. And maybe, just maybe that was enough. The sky had deepened into a soft indigo, and the garden sparkled with a constellation of tiny golden lights, strung through trees, wrapped around pillars, and woven into the centerpieces. It was the kind of scene that magazines loved, curated to perfection, frozen in time. But under that perfection, something trembled. Sadie Monroe stood just beyond the manicured hedges, her heels kicked off and hidden behind a stone bench. Her bare feet pressed against the cool grass, grounding her in a way nothing else had that day. From a distance, the laughter and music continued a polished performance. But here in this quiet patch behind the rose trellis, Sadie could breathe. The satin of her lilac dress clung to her spine, as a light breeze swept through her carefully pinned hair, was beginning to loosen a few strands sticking to her cheek. She didn't fix it. For once, she didn't care. She closed her eyes. And then footsteps. She opened them to find Lucas standing a few paces away, one hand in his pocket, the other holding Ellie's little cardigan. He looked hesitant, as if unsure whether to approach or retreat. She left this at the table, he said softly. Sadie reached out her fingers, brushing his as she took it. Thank you. Lucas lingered, not out of awkwardness, but something deeper, like instinct, had led him here, before a thought could catch up. You okay? He asked after a moment. Sadie gave a small, tired smile. Define okay. He nodded, glancing at the lights above them. This place, it's something, that's one word for it. There was a silence then, not uncomfortable but heavy with things. Neither of them quite knew how to say. Sadie finally sat on the bench, her bare feet tucked beneath her. You know, when I saw your name on the RSVP list, I wasn't sure you'd come. I wasn't sure either. Lucas admitted took me 3 days to decide. Why'd you say yes? He looked at her carefully, because you're the only person from high school I ever wondered about. That made her blink. Really, Lucas shrugged. You were always different. Not in a bad way. Just quieter, smarter, sadder. Sadie looked away, not in shame but in recognition. You weren't wrong. You still right? He asked. She let out a quiet laugh. Not for years. Now it's contracts, branding, briefs, PR statements. All the things that sound like words but aren't really saying anything. I remember you used to draw in the margins of your notebooks. I still have one, she said, somewhere buried under 6 layers of curated adulthood. Lucas smiled. Maybe you should dig it up. Sadie tilted her head toward him, something vulnerable flickering in her eyes. Why does it feel like you see me clearer than anyone else here? He didn't answer right away. Then maybe because I'm not trying to look through you, I'm just here. She studied him, the calloused hands, the quiet posture, the eyes that held no judgment. I remember that coat. She said suddenly. Lucas looked surprised. You do. It was green, too big for you. Had a patch on the elbow. He laughed. My dad's old hunting jacket smelled like cedar and oil. I kept it for years. She said I wore it every time I needed to feel safe. Lucas's breath caught in his throat. Sadie stood then walking barefoot to the edge of the garden wall. Everyone thinks this wedding is a fairy tale, and it is just not mine. It's for the photographers, the donors, the family name. Then why go through with it? She turned back to him, moonlight brushing her cheekbones, because I forgot what it felt like to be seen. Until today, Lucas said nothing. He didn't have a speech prepared. No grand gestures, just the silence of a man who understood. Sadie looked down, voice softer now. I envy Ellie. He tilted his head. Why? Because she looks at the world like it's still full of magic. She hasn't learned to hide who she is. Lucas chuckled. Give her time. Sadie smiled, then grew serious. Lucas, if I asked you to stay for the whole wedding, would you? He hesitated, not because he didn't want to, but because he didn't know what it meant. For you, he said, yeah, I would. She stepped closer, the distance between them folding like fabric. Thank you, she whispered. Not just for coming, but for reminding me of who I used to be. Lucas met her gaze, and for a long, quiet moment, nothing moved. The party hummed on behind them, the created perfection still playing its part. But in this forgotten corner of the estate, a different kind of truth bloomed barefoot and unscripted. The sun had set fully now, leaving the Callister estate bathed in warm, electric light. Strings of golden bulbs glowed like a net of stars overhead, casting romantic shadows on the marble floor of the open-air pavilion, where the dinner reception was beginning. Everything was unfolding like clockwork. The tables gleamed with polished silverware centerpieces of white orchids, hovered like mist over crystal vases, and servers in black vests flowed between guests with practiced grace. Every detail had been orchestrated, every moment scripted, and Sadie Monroe, the bride-to-be, stood at the center of it all, looking like the picture of serenity. But inside she was cracking. Her smile held her posture perfect. Her engagement rings sparkled under the lights, but her breath caught every time someone called her name. Every time Chad placed his hand at the small of her back, like she was a piece of property he was presenting to the world. He hadn't noticed she wasn't eating, or that she had excused herself 3 times already, or that her voice had gone flat like she was reading lines from a script she'd stopped believing in. From across the garden, her eyes found Lucas. He wasn't mingling, wasn't networking, wasn't adjusting his tie or checking his watch. He was sitting with Ellie, showing her how to fold a napkin into the shape of a bird. Ellie was laughing and Lucas was smiling, not for show, but because the moment deserved it. Sadie envied them so fiercely it hurt. She turned back to Chad, who was laughing with a business associate about something involving shipping routes and real estate in Jackson Hole. She nodded at the right times, sipped her champagne, and mentally counted how many steps it would take to reach the exit. Isn't it wonderful, her mother whispered beside her, clutching her arm with barely hidden pressure. Everything turned out exactly as we planned. Sadie didn't answer, because it hadn't been her plan for years. Her childhood had been one long dress rehearsal for this moment. Dance classes, voice lessons, etiquette training. Her mother corrected her posture at age 6. Her father once grounded her for speaking too casually at a board dinner. Love wasn't part of the Monroe legacy. Success was status alignment with the right families, and the Callisters were the crown jewel. Sadie had met Chad at a gala. Their parents had introduced them with gleaming eyes like realtors showing off a property that sold itself. He was handsome, polite, and utterly uninterested in who she was beyond her last name and social capital. She had agreed to dinner, then to a charity function, then to a week in Martha's Vineyard. Eventually, she agreed to the ring, because saying yes was easier than explaining why she wanted to say no. And now here she was. Sadie excused herself from the table for the 4th time, heading toward the back edge of the garden where the lights didn't quite reach. She needed space. And there he was again. Lucas leaning casually against a stone column, watching the evening with the quiet calm of someone who had nothing to prove. She approached before she could second-guess herself. You always find the edges of the room, she said. He looked over, not surprised. You too, apparently. They stood together in silence for a while. The music floated to them, something classical and soft, designed to evoke elegance. I feel like I'm in someone else's movie, she said quietly. Lucas didn't interrupt. I keep wondering, she continued. What happens if I just walk away? Just stop. And and then I remember who's watching, what it would mean, the money that's been spent, the arrangements, the press releases, the speeches already written. She exhaled slowly, her shoulders sinking. I'm the perfect bride, she said flatly. I just don't know whose bride I am. Lucas finally spoke. Maybe the person you're marrying should be asking the same question. Sadie turned toward him. Do you ever regret not choosing ambition? He blinked. I chose survival. Then I chose Ellie. Then I stopped needing much else. That sounds honest? It is, she bit her lip. And what if I told you I don't even know who I am when I'm not being who I'm supposed to be? Lucas met her eyes. Then maybe that's the person you should start getting to know. Sadie looked down at her hands, twisting the ring around her finger. What if it's too late? It's never too late to stop pretending. He said simply. A sudden gust swept through the garden, sending petals tumbling from a nearby vase. Sadie closed her eyes and listened to them fall like small truths being dropped into the silence. When she opened them, Lucas was still there. Not judging, not rescuing. Just there. You're dangerous, she said softly. He tilted his head. How so? Because for the first time in a long time, I feel like I could say the truth out loud. Lucas stepped closer, his voice low. Then say it. Sadie stared at him, heart pounding. I don't want to marry Chad. There it was done. No lightning struck. No walls collapsed, just relief. Warm and terrifying. Lucas nodded, as if he'd known all along. I don't know what to do next, she admitted. You don't have to figure it out tonight, he said. Just don't lie to yourself tomorrow. Tears stung her eyes, but she didn't let them fall. Instead, she looked up at the lights, then at the guests laughing like nothing was wrong. Then back at the man who wasn't laughing at all, but who saw her completely. And for the first time all night, Sadie smiled. Not for the cameras, not for the guests, just for herself. The hush that swept over the Callister estate was the kind that came just before a storm or just before a fairy tale began. The string quartet shifted into a soft processional melody. Rows of guests turned toward the stone archway at the edge of the garden, where the bride would soon appear. Every phone was raised, every breath held. Lucas stood near the back, Ellie perched on his shoulders, twirling a small bouquet someone had handed her. The child's eyes sparkled with anticipation, but Lucas's gaze was elsewhere, on the tension tightening around his ribs. He had seen Sadie only minutes before alone near the service tent, staring at her reflection in a darkened window. Her veil had hung loosely from her perfectly pinned hair, her dress cascading like a cloud of silk spun from expectation. But it was the look in her eyes that haunted him. She hadn't looked like a woman about to begin something. She looked like a woman preparing to escape. The music rose. And then she appeared. Sadie stepped into view every inch. The elegant bride, ivory satin gown, diamond earrings, a cascading bouquet of white roses. But Lucas saw it. The slight hesitation in her step. The moment her fingers tightened around her flowers, the flicker in her gaze. She walked slowly down the aisle, her father at her side, every eye glued to her. The crowd sighed in admiration. Cameras clicked. Her mother wept softly into a handkerchief embroidered with her maiden name. At the altar, Chad stood like a man preparing for a business acquisition. Hands folded, smile, firm chin, lifted just enough to project control. Sadie stopped before him. The music faded. The officiant began his speech lines Sadie had heard during the rehearsal, but barely remembered now. Something about unity, about forever. Lucas couldn't move. He felt Ellie's small hand on his head, but the sound of his own pulse drowned everything else. The officiant turned to Sadie. Do you, Sadie Monroe, take Chadwick, Callister, to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold in wealth and health, in legacy and duty, as long as you both shall live? The pause was microscopic, but it was there. A heartbeat missed. Sadie looked at Chad, then at the crowd. Then, down at her feet, the heels, beautiful. Brutal, her toes ached. Not from the shoes, but from the years she had spent curling them inside herself, never taking a full step in her own direction. Sadie breathed in, and then with calm, measured grace, she bent. The crowd murmured. She slipped off one heel, then the other, and stepped out of the perfect posture they'd trained into her since she was 10. Sadie Chad whispered, confusion flashing in his voice. She turned to him. "I'm sorry," she said, not loudly, but it carried. "I can't." The officiant blinked. "Miss Monroe." Sadie turned to the guests. "Thank you all for coming. Truly, but this isn't my story, not anymore." Gasps, chairs shifted. Her mother rose from the front row, lips parting in horror. Sadie, no, but Sadie had already stepped off the platform. The aisle parted like water around her. She didn't run, she didn't cry. She walked barefoot, slow, steady, like a woman finally making the only choice that had ever been hers. And she walked straight toward Lucas. He didn't speak, didn't move. He couldn't. Sadie stopped in front of him, hair loosening in the wind, face flushed, not with shame, but with certainty. "I'm not running away," she said quietly. "I'm walking towards something, towards someone who sees me, someone who doesn't need me to be anyone but me." Lucas swallowed hard. "You don't owe me anything," he said. "I know," she whispered. "That's why I trust you." Then she looked at Ellie, who stared at her wide-eyed. "Is it okay if I borrow your dad for a little while?" Ellie, after a beat, nodded solemnly. "Only if you promise to bring him back?" Sadie smiled, truly smiled for the first time that day. "I will." Lucas hesitated. Then slowly he reached for her hand. Their fingers touched. Somewhere behind them, chaos bloomed. Chad demanding explanations. Her mother calling for the driver guests, wondering if this was a stunt. But none of it mattered, because in that one fragile moment, Sadie and Lucas walked away from the noise. Not toward a future fully known, but toward a life that for once would be built step by step in bare feet on honest ground. They didn't say much in the minutes that followed. They didn't have to. Sadie and Lucas walked side by side through the quiet back gate of the Callister estate, leaving behind the stunned murmurs, camera flashes, and gasps of disbelief. Her heels dangled from 2 fingers, forgotten. The cool stone path turned to gravel, then soft grass, then dirt beneath her bare feet, grounding her with each step. The sky stretched open above them, no chandeliers, no lace draped from trees, just stars. Real, blinking, imperfect stars. Sadie breathed in deep. "I haven't walked barefoot outside since I was 16, she said. Lucas gave a small smile. "You look like you were born for it." Sadie let out a half laugh, half sob. "Well, I'm not sure my mother would agree." He looked over at her. "You okay?" She stopped walking, letting the silence settle around them before answering. "I think I'm more okay now than I've been in years." Lucas nodded, giving her space to gather herself. He had never been one to fill silence for the sake of it. They reached the edge of a quiet gravel road where Lucas's old truck still waited under a drooping elm tree. He unlocked the door and helped Sadie in, gently, as if she might shatter from the weight of the moment. She didn't protest. For once it felt good to let someone steady her. Ellie was curled in the back seat, fast asleep, her cardigan bunched under her head like a pillow. Sadie watched her for a moment, a soft smile forming. "She's something else," she whispered. Lucas slid into the driver's seat. "She's my whole world." Sadie nodded. "I can tell." The engine sputtered to life with its usual stubborn cough, and Lucas pulled onto the quiet road leading away from the estate. Behind them, the distant estate lights shimmered like a ghost of the life she had just walked out of. "You didn't have to come after me," Sadie said after a few minutes. "I know," Lucas replied. "But I did." Why? He hesitated. "Because I didn't want you to be alone." "Not tonight." Sadie looked out the window, blinking quickly. "Thank you." They drove in silence for a while, the night whispering around them. No questions, no demands, just the hum of possibility. Eventually, Lucas turned off the main road and pulled into a small roadside diner, the kind with neon signs and creaky booths. It was quiet, nearly empty. "Thought you might need something real to eat," he said gently. Sadie blinked at him. "I just left a 7-course meal with gold leaf on the appetizers, and this," she looked at the flickering sign above the door. "This is exactly what I want." Inside, the waitress didn't recognize her, Or if she didn't say so, they ordered coffee, grilled cheese, and 2 slices of pie, cherry for Sadie, apple for Lucas. Sadie took her first bite and groaned. "This is sinful." Lucas smiled. "Told you." For the first time that day, Sadie let herself lean back in the booth. She didn't have to smile for anyone, didn't have to impress or perform. "So what now?" she asked, stirring her coffee. Lucas took a breath. "Now you breathe, you sleep. You let the world spin without trying to control it." "That's terrifying," she admitted. Only at first she studied him for a long moment. "I meant what I said. I didn't leave because of you. I left because of me. Because I forgot who I was until you reminded me I didn't do anything special." Lucas said. "But that's just it," she replied, her voice thick. "You didn't do anything to get something. You were kind without an angle, gentle without being passive. You let me be messy and scared and real." He met her eyes, then steady. "Quiet, you make it easy," he said softly. That caught her breath. Outside, a semi-truck rumbled by on the highway. The lights flashed across the windows, then disappeared into the night. "I'm not asking for anything," Sadie said carefully. "I'm not even sure what I can give right now. But I didn't want to go home to an empty hotel room. I didn't want to be alone." Lucas reached across the table, his hand brushing hers. "You're not alone." They finished their coffee slowly, the pie mostly forgotten. When they stepped back outside, the air was cooler, gentler. Sadie wrapped Lucas's flannel around her shoulders, laughing when she realized it still smelled faintly of sawdust and mint gum. They drove through the quiet night until they reached Lucas's house, a modest, weathered 2-bedroom tucked near a grove of birches on the edge of town. The porch light flickered, the screen door creaked, and to Sadie it looked like the most honest place in the world. Lucas carried Ellie in, still sleeping. Sadie stood in the doorway, unsure. "You want to stay?" Lucas asked, his voice calm. She nodded slowly. "Just for the night." He showed her the guest room, simple, clean, with mismatched furniture and a quilt that looked hand-stitched. As he turned to leave, Sadie caught his hand. "Lucas," he paused, "thank you for being the first person I didn't have to impress." He gave her a long look. "Thank you for being the first person who didn't try to fix me." They stood like that for a moment, 2 people used to carrying weight alone, now leaning just enough. Then he let her go, and she stepped into the quiet of her new beginning. Morning came quietly in Lucas's world. No buzzing phone, no schedule packed with obligations, just sunlight filtering through linen curtains, the smell of brewing coffee, and the gentle creak of old wood warming in the sun. Outside, a blue jay called from a pine branch, and somewhere in the distance a rooster gave a single, unhurried crow. Sadie stood at the window of the guest room, barefoot, wrapped in one of Lucas's soft, oversized flannel shirts. She hadn't slept much, but for the first time in years, the stillness didn't feel suffocating. It felt earned. She looked down at the small garden below. A half-built picnic table sat off-center beneath a maple tree. Surrounded by scrap wood tools and a metal lunchbox, Lucas's world, unpolished, undeniably real. A knock at the door pulled her from her thoughts. Lucas appeared with a shy smile, 2 mugs in hand. "Didn't know how you take it," he said. "So I made it strong and sweet." Sadie accepted the mug. Their fingers brushed, strong and sweet sounds about right. They sat on the front porch together, mugs warm in their hands. Ellie was still asleep inside, curled beneath the hand-stitched quilt. Sadie had admired the night before. The porch faced east, catching the early sun. Wildflowers dotted the edge of the gravel driveway. A hummingbird zipped past, wings a blur. "This place is," Sadie began. "Humble." Lucas offered. She shook her head. "Peaceful." He sipped his coffee. "It wasn't always." They didn't talk much after that. The silence between them was easy now, full of unspoken understanding. There was no need to rush toward anything. The act of simply sitting together was enough. By midday, Ellie tumbled out of bed, hair in a wild nest, her cheeks flushed with sleep. "Sadie," she beamed. "You stayed, I did." Sadie said, smiling back. "I wanted to see what pancakes taste like in this house." Ellie turned to Lucas with wide eyes. "Can we?" He grinned. Pancakes at his breakfast turned into a slow, happy mess. Lucas flipped lopsided pancakes. Ellie added blueberries in uneven clumps. Sadie set the table and burned the bacon. They laughed more than they ate. Later, they wandered outside. Lucas showed Sadie the woodworking shed. He built himself, complete with mismatched nails and a floor that creaked in a single spot. Ellie picked dandelions and insisted on putting one behind Sadie's ear. "You look like a forest queen," she declared. Sadie laughed. "I'll take that." As the afternoon settled in, Lucas leaned against a workbench, watching as Sadie helped Ellie paint small wooden hearts for wind chimes. There was paint on her fingers, a smudge of blue on her cheek, and a light in her eyes he hadn't seen before. She caught him looking and tilted her head. "What nothing," he said. "Just you fit here better than I expected." She paused, brushed midair. So did I. That evening, they sat beneath the stars again. The three of them wrapped in an old blanket on the porch swing, sipping hot cocoa and listening to cicadas sing. "I was supposed to be in Paris next week," Sadie said suddenly. Lucas raised an eyebrow. "For your honeymoon? No." "For a board meeting?" She chuckled, shaking her head. "Chad booked it before the wedding date was even finalized," said. "I needed to show the merger face." Lucas snorted. "Sounds romantic." "Oh, deeply," she deadpanned. "But now I'm here, drinking cocoa in a borrowed shirt, and I don't think I've ever felt more human." He looked at her. "That's a good thing, right?" She met his gaze. "It's everything." The next few days passed like pages in a gentle storybook. Sadie stayed. She didn't say how long. Lucas didn't ask. She helped Ellie build a birdhouse from scraps. She swept the porch. She sat on the steps at dusk with her sketch pad and slowly began to draw again. Faces, flowers, a pair of small hands clutching a dandelion stem. Lucas watched her quietly, never pushing, always present. He'd bring her coffee in the morning and a blanket at night. Not once did he ask her to define what they were, and that perhaps was why she stayed. Because in a world where everything had demanded a label, a category, a market value, Lucas had asked for nothing. His kindness wasn't currency, it was compass. And for a woman who had spent most of her life circling a map drawn by others, it felt like coming home. One afternoon, Sadie found herself in the back of Lucas's truck, parked under a sycamore, watching Ellie gather wildflowers for a bouquet. Big enough to sell, Lucas was sitting beside her. Legs stretched out, a thermos between them. "I think I want to start something," she said. He glanced at her. "A bakery," she smiled. "No, a place for kids to create, to draw, to make mistakes. Like a little art shed." Lucas looked out at Ellie, who had wrapped a long blade of grass around her wrist like a bracelet. "I think that sounds perfect," he said. Sadie nodded slowly, her voice soft. "But sure, I don't want to go back to who I was." Lucas turned to her. "I don't think you could if you tried." They sat there until the sun dipped below the trees, painting the world in gold. And for the first time in either of their lives, direction didn't come from pressure, deadlines, or guilt. It came from kindness, and that was enough. The first nail went in crooked. Sadie frowned at it, hammer in hand, the head of the nail slightly askew in the beam of the wooden frame. "That doesn't look right," Lucas chuckled beside her. "That's why we start with the back wall." They were standing behind Lucas's house, where a patch of weedy grass had been cleared for a project now beginning to take shape, the art shed. A space Sadie dreamed aloud one evening, under the stars, part studio, part haven, part gentle rebellion against the sterile life she had left behind. Lucas had nodded, quiet but firm. "We'll build it." And now every day after work, every morning, between pancakes and Ellie's insistence on dandelion tea parties they did, Sadie had rolled up her sleeves, bought gloves, dug trenches, sawed wood. She wasn't good at it. Not yet. But the calluses on her palms, the dust in her hair, and the ache in her shoulders felt like truth. "I used to pay people to hang my curtains," she said, squinting at the crooked frame. Lucas raised an eyebrow. "And now I'm learning to measure twice and cut once." He smiled. "Now you're dangerous." By week's end, the shed had bones, 4 standing walls, a roofline penciled into the sky, and a floor that creaked pleasantly when you walked across it. Sadie insisted on painting the front door. Sunflower yellow. Ellie added lavender handprints around the frame. Lucas built a wooden bench from salvaged planks, sanded smooth until it gleamed. Neighbors began to notice a retired teacher drop by with a box of colored pencils and yarn. A teen from down the road offered to help on weekends. Lucas's friend Vince stopped by with a bag of old paintbrushes. "It's not just a shed anymore," Sadie said one afternoon, watching Ellie teach two neighborhood kids how to mix paints on paper plates. "It's becoming something." Lucas nodded. "It's becoming yours." Sadie turned to him, eyes thoughtful. "No ours." He didn't respond, but something in his chest shifted. A small, cautious door creaked open. Each day, the rhythm of their lives found steadier beat. Mornings began with coffee on the porch, afternoons with tools and paint, evenings with Ellie's stories and the hum of fireflies. Sometimes Lucas would play guitar quietly after dinner, fingers dancing over the strings with the same unassuming grace he brought to everything else. And yet underneath it all, something else was growing, tender, unsure. Real one night after Ellie had gone to bed, and the house was steeped in the hush of late summer. Sadie lingered at the table while Lucas dried dishes. She didn't say anything at first, just watched him, the way he moved, the way he wiped down the counter twice out of habit, the way he set things back in their exact place. "Do you ever think," she asked, "that some people are meant to come into your life only when you're ready for them?" Lucas looked at her slowly. "I think some people show up when you finally stop pretending you don't need them." Sadie's breath caught. She looked down at her hands, paint-stained, knuckle-scraped, a tiny bandage on her thumb. "These hands used to sign contracts and give speeches," she murmured. "Now they build birdhouses and stir pancake batter. And which do you like better?" Lucas asked. Sadie smiled without lifting her gaze. "The ones that get dirty." He crossed the kitchen quietly, placed the dish towel on the hook, then leaned against the counter watching her. She looked up at him, not with hesitation, not anymore, but with something deeper. A kind of knowing. "I'm scared," she admitted. "Of what?" "That this won't last. That I'll ruin it. That I'll wake up one day and forget why I chose this." Lucas stepped closer. "You won't," he said simply, "because it's not built on pretending. It's built on small, real things. That's what lasts." Sadie blinked back something behind her eyes. "You talk like someone who's lived through collapse." He nodded. "I have." There was a long pause between them, a stillness that asked permission to become something more. But then a knock at the door. Lucas opened it to find a man in a pressed blazer standing on the porch holding a sealed envelope and a clipboard. "Miss Monroe?" the man asked, scanning past Lucas. Sadie stood, arms folded. "Yes, I represent Callister Holdings. This is a formal request for return of property, including jewelry and confidential documents, related to prior engagements with Chadwick." Callister. Lucas stiffened. Sadie remained still. "I'll have my lawyer contact you," she said, voice even. The man nodded curtly and left Lucas close the door slowly. "You okay?" Sadie exhaled. "I knew it was coming. I just didn't expect it to follow me here." "You want me to?" "No," she interrupted gently. "I've got this." She turned away from the door and walked back into the kitchen, standing where the warmth still lingered from before Lucas followed. They didn't talk about it again that night. They didn't need to. Sadie had made her choice. The world was just catching up. The next morning they returned to the shed. Sadie picked up her brush. Lucas handed her a nail. Ellie scattered glitter over a paper sun. And with each stroke, each board, each laugh shared over crooked corners and wobbly walls. They weren't just building a place for art. They were building something that just might withstand time, because it wasn't perfect, it wasn't polished, but it was theirs. It began with a phone call. Sadie had just come in from the garden, dirt smudged on her cheek. Her hands wrapped around a basket of tomatoes Ellie had helped her pick. The shed was nearly finished. A final coat of paint had dried that morning, and Lucas had carved a wooden sign that read, "The Art Nook, rustic, uneven, and perfect." The phone rang just as she set the basket on the counter. She didn't recognize the number. She nearly didn't answer. But something in her, some lingering tether to the life she thought she'd severed, made her press the green button. "Sadie," the voice said, cool and polished. "It's Thomas Redford." She blinked. Her father's attorney. "What do you want?" she asked, reaching for a dish towel. "I'm calling on behalf of your family's trust board." "And Callister Holdings," he added carefully. "Of course you are," she said, tired. "There's been considerable media attention, damage to both reputations. However," he cleared his throat, There's still an opportunity if you're willing to be pragmatic. Sadie leaned against the counter, heart beginning to race. Chad has requested a public reconciliation. Redford continued. One carefully staged event, followed by a gradual withdrawal from the spotlight. No marriage, of course, but it would restore faith in your public persona. Your position with the foundation would remain, your shares would remain, and if I say no, there was a pause. You would be removed from the board and likely disinherited. Sadie let the words settle like stones at the bottom of a clear lake. I'll think about it, she said, and hung up. She didn't move, didn't speak. Lucas came in moments later, wiping his hands with a rag. Ellie wants you to see the banner she painted. It says open soon, but she spelled soon with 3 O's. Sadie didn't laugh. She looked up at him, pale. They want me back, she said. Lucas froze, then leaned against the opposite counter. What does that mean? They want me to fix their image. Say it was a misunderstanding. Show up for a few photos, then quietly fade away. And they're offering everything back. My position, my name, my shares. Lucas studied her. And what are they taking? Sadie didn't answer. She didn't need to. That night the house was quieter than usual. Ellie sensed something and curled up beside Sadie on the couch, thumb in her mouth. Eyes drifting to sleep, Lucas brought them tea but didn't ask questions. When the house was finally still, Sadie stood on the back porch and stared at the shed under the moonlight. It was humble, slightly uneven in places. The windows didn't match. The floor had a soft slope, but it was hers and theirs. And real Lucas came out and stood beside her, arms crossed loosely. I'm sorry, she whispered. This isn't your burden. It kind of is, he said. Because you are, she looked at him sharply. He didn't flinch. You matter to me. So does whatever you're carrying. Sadie turned back to the shed. I told myself I was done with that world, but it still has its claws in me. It still knows how to say just the right words, Lucas nodded. That's how power works. I was trained my whole life to say yes. He was quiet for a moment. Then you don't owe them anything. I know that, she said. But part of me still wants their approval. Still wants to be not rejected. Lucas stepped closer. It's okay to want that. It's not okay to let it define you. Tears welled hot and silent. She didn't speak for a long time, and when she did, it came in a whisper. I don't want to go back, but I'm scared to stay. Lucas looked at her for a long, long moment. Then I'll stand still until you decide. Sadie turned to him, her voice trembling. Why would you do that? Because love, he said simply, waits. She blinked. You love me. Lucas's jaw tightened slightly, but he didn't look away. Yes, the word landed like a gentle tide, not sweeping, but inevitable. Sadie let out a soft, shuddering breath. I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything tonight, he said, just don't lie to yourself tomorrow. She reached for his hand, the one with calluses, the one that had built every beam of that shed, the one that had held Ellie's through every storm and held it like an anchor. They stood like that until the night grew colder. When she woke the next morning, there was a letter already on the counter, unsigned, unsent, torn down the middle and thrown in the trash. Instead, Sadie picked up the paintbrush and added a final stroke of yellow to the shed door. She'd made her choice, not because it was easy, but because it was finally hers. Lucas had always been a man of few words and steady hands. He fixed what was broken, mended what could be salvaged, and let silence do the talking when words felt too thin. But that morning, as he stood in his shed, holding a small block of oak, even his hands trembled. It wasn't the wood that made him nervous. It was what he was carving into it. He'd picked the piece carefully, a knotty old remnant from a tree that once stood behind his childhood home. It had weathered years of rain, ice, and sun, but the grain inside still glowed golden. It reminded him of Sadie. He didn't have gold or diamonds. He wasn't the kind of man who knelt in candlelight or scripted speeches. But what he could give, he'd give completely. So he carved slowly with reverence. Meanwhile, outside the shed, life moved in its quiet rhythm. Ellie was in the kitchen with Sadie, covered in flour, working on what could loosely be called biscuits. The radio played a jazz station with soft static, and the windows were cracked just enough to let in the smell of sun-warmed pine. Sadie laughed a full, unguarded sound that stopped Lucas's hand mid-carve. He smiled later that afternoon. With the sun dipping low behind the birches, Lucas found Sadie on the porch swing, a sketchbook open in her lap. She was barefoot again, wearing a loose shirt of his and soft jeans she'd borrowed from a thrift store in town. "I think I'm finally getting the hang of drawing birds," she said, as he approached. Lucas sat beside her, handing her a small linen pouch. "You've always had the hang of seeing things." She looked at the pouch, then back at him. "What's this? Something I've been working on?" Carefully, Sadie untied the string and pulled out a small wooden ring, not perfectly round but smooth and warm, with delicate carvings around the edge. Her breath caught. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "You made this?" He nodded. Sadie turned it over in her hand, fingers tracing the grain. Then she noticed the carving inside, tiny initials, L, E, and S, woven in a small vine. Her throat tightened. "I didn't want to ask you a question with expectations," Lucas said, voice low. "I just wanted you to have something that says this is home, if you want it." Sadie blinked fast, holding the ring like it might dissolve if she breathed too hard. "Lucas, I love you," he said simply. "Not the version of you that made headlines. Not the woman who walked away from a wedding. Just you, the one who eats burnt bacon and paints wildflowers on the back of napkins." She laughed through the tears that now streamed freely. "I'm not always sure who that woman is." He reached for her hand. "Then we'll figure her out together." There was no music, no flashbulbs, just the sound of wind through leaves, and Ellie inside, humming off key while cleaning up the flower storm she'd created. Sadie looked at the ring again. "I don't need a diamond," she said. "I've had diamonds. They never made me feel like this." She slid the wooden band onto her finger. It fit a little loose, a little off-center, just like everything in this new life, perfect in its imperfection. Then, as if on cue, Ellie burst onto the porch, cheeks flushed. "Did he do it?" she cried. "Did Daddy give you the thing?" Sadie laughed. "He did." Ellie clapped wildly. "Are we getting a cake?" "There has to be cake." Lucas rubbed his forehead. "We haven't talked about any of that yet." Ellie huffed. "Well, you'd better. You can't just give someone a ring and not have cake. That's against the rules." Sadie scooped Ellie into her lap. "Then I guess we'll need to make some plans." That night they didn't talk about wedding venues or guest lists. They ate grilled cheese on the porch, watched fireflies gather, and listened to Ellie tell a wildly inaccurate version of how Lucas fought off dragons and lawyers to win Sadie's heart. And in the quiet after she fell asleep, Lucas and Sadie sat side by side, hands intertwined, eyes toward the stars. "I'm still scared," Sadie whispered. Lucas turned to her. "Me too." She leaned her head against his shoulder. "But this feels right." He kissed the top of her hair. "That's the only thing that matters." In a world obsessed with grand gestures, their love was a whisper, but it was steady and strong, and carved by hand, not for the world to see, but for them to keep. The morning of the wedding dawned quiet, warm and golden, the kind of day that didn't need permission to be beautiful. Sadie stood at the edge of the backyard, her bare feet sunk slightly into the dew-covered grass, the hem of her simple white dress brushing her ankles. The fabric wasn't designer. There were no rhinestones or corsets, just a soft linen dress sewn by hand, a few imperfect stitches by her, and a few, the crooked ones, by Ellie. She wore no veil, no heels, only a crown of fresh daisies and lavender. Ellie had woven that morning, uneven and lovely. Lucas stood 20 feet away, under a small wooden arch. He'd built himself decorated with sprigs of pine and sunflowers. He looked nervous, but in a way that made Sadie's heart tighten. Not because he doubted her, but because he still couldn't quite believe someone had chosen him. She was about to prove him wrong. The guests were few, just neighbors, friends, a retired art teacher, a mailman, and 2 mechanics from the auto shop down the street. Vince had brought folding chairs. Mrs. Carmichael brought her lemon pound cake. Ellie passed out programs. She had illustrated herself, mostly stick figures and hearts, but everyone said they were priceless. There was no organist, no formal officiant. Just June, the town librarian, who had quietly gotten certified online 3 days ago, and was now clutching a notebook with trembling hands. Sadie took a deep breath. Ellie, in a yellow dress with a wide ribbon sash, took her hand. "You ready?" Sadie smiled. More than ever, together they walked down the makeshift aisle, a path of wildflowers strewn by the neighborhood kids earlier that morning. Every step felt like it erased a little more of the life she'd left behind. Every smile, every whispered cheer stitched her new life together. When she reached Lucas, he didn't say anything. He just looked at her like she was the sunrise, the start of something. "You're barefoot," he said softly. "So are you," she whispered back, nodding at his feet, toes curled into the grass. "I guess we're really doing this," he said. Sadie grinned. "We've been doing this. This is just the ceremony." June cleared her throat, nervously flipping through her notebook. "Dearly beloved Orwell friends and neighbors," she began. "We're gathered here today, not because we were told to or paid to or expected to, but because two people looked at each other and without fanfare, without asking for anything, they chose each other." Sadie felt Lucas's hand tighten around hers. "Today you're not promising perfection," June continued. "You're promising truth. Messy, beautiful, everyday truth." She looked to Lucas. "Do you have something you'd like to say?" Lucas cleared his throat. "I don't have a speech," he said, "or a poem. I just have this. I spent a lot of my life fixing things, and I thought that made me useful. But then you showed up, and I realized maybe I'm allowed to build something too." "With you," Sadie blinked quickly. June turned to her. Sadie took a breath. "Most of my life I was told who I should be, who I should marry, how I should speak, how I should love. But I never felt whole until I stopped following their script and walked barefoot into my own story." She looked at Lucas, and there you were already standing in the grass. June swallowed a lump in her throat. "Do you, Sadie Monroe, take Lucas Heron to be your partner in love? In work and pie burning and paint splattering for as long as your hearts choose each other, I do. And Lucas, do you take Sadie to be your partner? In laughter and silence, in late night repairs and early morning pancakes for as long as your love grows?" "I do," Ellie stepped forward, holding out the small wooden ring Lucas had carved. Here Daddy Lucas slipped it onto Sadie's finger, a little more worn, now a little more golden. She slid a simple silver band onto his, one she'd found at the thrift store, and polished with her own hands. "Then by the power vested in me," June said, her voice wobbling by the state of Oregon and the Public Library Association, "I now pronounce you husband and wife." The crowd clapped, loud and joyful. Lucas leaned forward, brushing a kiss across Sadie's forehead. She closed her eyes and leaned into him like she'd finally exhaled after years of holding her breath. Then Ellie shouted, "Cake time." And just like that, the wedding became a backyard party. Kids running through sprinklers, music playing from a tinny speaker lemonade in mismatched cups, and laughter echoing across the yard. Sadie and Lucas sat under the birch tree where it all began, plates on their laps, legs tangled, fingers intertwined. "I never thought I'd end up here," Sadie whispered. Lucas looked at her, steady as ever. "Me neither, but I'm glad we did." She nodded. "You know what I think this is? What a miracle. The quiet kind. The kind you almost miss unless you're paying attention." He smiled. "Then let's make sure we don't miss a thing." And they didn't. Not that day. Not in the life that followed, made of ordinary moments stitched together by love, kindness, and the choice again and again to show up barefoot, open-hearted, and fully seen. We'd love to know where you're watching from. Are you from a small town like Lucas and Ellie, or somewhere far away that still believes in stories like this one? If this story touched your heart, please let us know in the comments. We read every single one. And if you'd like to hear more stories about kindness, resilience, and unexpected love, make sure to subscribe and turn on the notification bell. There's always more to come. Thank you so much for spending your time with us. Until next time, take care and keep believing in good things.